Welcome back to Breakfast Extra. Now, in this segment, we turn our attention to one of the most dynamic shifts looming across our region, mobility and transportation. Now, as West Africa grapples with urban congestion, climate pressures and import dependency, a bold transition is gaining traction. The phasing out of petrol fuel vehicles. Countries and regional bodies are now discussing timelines, incentive schemes and policy frameworks to replace internal combustion cars with cleaner alternatives. For Nigeria, this isn't just about greener air. It's about jobs, it's about infrastructure, it's about investment and how millions of everyday commuters get around.
We've seen this as well happening at also the grassroots level. But anyway, joining us today to have an in-depth analysis on whether or not this is possible is Adedayo Odunlami. He is the CEO and co-founder of Zoome, a startup on the front line of mobility innovation. We'll ask how realistic is a petrol car phase out in Nigeria and the entirety of West Africa? What will it mean for drivers, mechanics and city life? And how can we make sure the transition is inclusive, not disruptive? So from tariffs and charging stations to used car imports and even policy certainty, this conversation has major implications for businesses as well as environment and the way we live. Without further ado, Adedayo is here in the studio. Good morning to you.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you so much for coming on.
Awesome.
We are in this conversation that I dread. I don't think I dread. It's just it makes me wonder about how we're going to phase out in terms of our current status of petrol vehicle usage in Nigeria and West Africa when we look at the number and also the trends. Is Africa and Nigeria ready?
I mean, it's more of a question. It's now a question of when, not if anymore, right? We've seen changes already in East Africa, and I'm keeping it within the African continent now.
Yes.
In the West, they're already significantly advanced, in terms of the e-mobility adoption and all of that.
Right.
But in the West here, West Africa, a huge part of our transportation is still around the 2- and 3-wheeler vehicles, right? They represent roughly around 70% of the vehicles that we have on the road today.
That's right.
Nigeria is home to, about 8 million of those vehicles, the largest on the continent. West Africa as a whole is home to about 35 million of those 2- and 3-wheeler vehicles. Those vehicles span across Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Mali, and Burkina Faso. So a huge part of our transportation still, sort of lies around the 2- and 3-wheeler vehicles. But we noticed something in 2023 when subsidy was taken off, right? Prices of fuel went up by 400%, and margins for business owners, micro entrepreneurs, people in the transportation sector got cut by nearly 50%. So those conversations already started from that point. The minute the subsidy went off, people started looking for alternatives. So we've seen alternatives in terms of CNG, but now the broader conversation and the long-term and more strategic plan, which I think is around the EV, has started. So you've seen government of different countries, even ECOWAS, conversations have now started to say, at what point do we now begin to, start the shift? We saw what happened, or we've seen what has happened in East Africa, where, some countries have even gone on to outrightly ban some of these vehicles, put very high import duty taxes on them. So I think the conversation has already started in West Africa. Nigeria is not even left out, and it's only a matter of time before we see mass adoption of these vehicles on our roads.
Honestly, Adedayo, I'm tempted to think that in Africa, perhaps we're just, because the West is doing it, we're following suit, as opposed to looking at what the real problem is. For example, electric cars now you're talking about, we're still dealing with electricity generally for even normal human beings to consume.
We don't have good roads.
Exactly. Not to not talk of having charging ports that will be effective. So it's good for us. It sounds good, no doubt, but looking at our own peculiar problem.
Yeah. So I think what is actually driving this conversation in Nigeria especially has been the removal of the subsidy, right? The operating expenses for a lot of users, and I'm keeping this conversation to, the transport sector that houses more of these vehicles, is that, cost of running the business has just significantly spiked. They can't continue to run the business the way they used to do before subsidy. So the conversation around how do we then begin a transition has started. It's a nascent space, we agree, and it's going to take a lot of effort from individuals government and agencies, organizations to actually build out this space. But that's the job it is we're doing at Zoome, building the infrastructure.
Did I say Zoom earlier? I did Zoom.
So that's what we're doing at Zoome, right? Building out the infrastructure to drive the adoption of these electric vehicles across the country. So I think that we're not just following the West the way you think about it. I think it's more of a necessity for us now. And that's just because eventually, even the West that are selling us a lot of these petrol cars don't have, they'll stop manufacturing them. So where do we go from there? So at some point, the conversation has to shift to electric vehicle, and it's a long and strategic conversation that needs to be had across not just Nigeria, even the whole of Africa.
Well, we have to come back home, Sha, because when we think about our grid capacity, to begin with, is collapsing every 5 years.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if we're doing the transition, what are we looking at in terms of infrastructure for grid capacity for electric cars?
Yeah, so you're very correct. Our grid is very unstable. Today, what we have done, at Zoome is look at hybrid solution and decentralized energy solutions to sort of tackle that problem. And I think that's where the long-term plan, even for a country like Nigeria, is going to sit. How we're able to combine hybrid solutions, pending the time we're able to generate, transmit, and make sufficient grid power available across networks. We'll continue to look at some of the solutions I mentioned. It's also important to say that we are in the battery charging and swapping business. We've facilitated over 50,000 battery swaps since inception. And one of the things that we've learned on that journey is our cheapest form of power today is still renewable energy, which is solar. And we're seeing that also gain huge traction, in Nigeria and across Africa. So solutions like this are what we're now embedding into the whole ecosystem in itself to catalyze adoption.
Taxi drivers, my friends. You know what I mean?
Yes.
The informal sector.
I'm telling you.
The mechanics.
Exactly. How would you understand?
Because they're... Don't make me get passionate. There's an entire ecosystem.
Yeah.
When we talk about taxi drivers, talk about Kurupe, there's also those mechanics that are at the Ladipo zone, Oyimbo as well. They have all their hotspots. If we're phasing out, how do we carry them along? I don't know if you want to add to that.
Exactly. Also, I was going to ask you, which is more expensive? Because at the end of the day, the price is also important. If you're telling us to let go of our fuel vehicles and electric cars are more expensive, it's now even more unrealistic because we're battling with the issue of power in Nigeria.
Right.
And we're battling with the price of the vehicle as well. So how realistic is that? Are the electric vehicles, are they more expensive than the fuel and the cars?
Upfront cost, yes, right? They're more expensive. But when you look at it in terms of total cost of ownership, it becomes cheaper because you're spending less actually running those vehicles. And I'll give you context, right? It's almost 4 times cheaper, 3.5 to 4 times cheaper to actually run an electric vehicle, right? Again, as compared to running a petrol and a petrol engine. So that cost-saving benefit that it affords the drivers, the micro entrepreneurs, the people in the transport sector is huge, right? And you need to also consider that because there is this cost-saving benefit on their day-to-day, it improves their margin, it improves their livelihood, it improves how much it is they're taking home. But what we've also seen and what it is we are also trying to do to sort of drive this adoption, right, is introduce some level of financing, because financing is then eventually what catalyzes, the adoption of these vehicles. So we're asking ourselves if we're able to have the drivers drive to own or the riders ride to own these vehicles on a daily basis, does it ease the burden of the upfront cost and allow them to, continue to use those vehicles until it becomes theirs at the end of the day? So those are some of the solutions that have been put up front. And you look at the EV market globally, those are what it is we've seen in other markets too. So Nigeria is not any different. We just want the policies to come in. We want there to be some level of standardization. Things around financing would help hugely in making these vehicles very affordable for off-takers and also significantly improve their margins, because you know we need to always remember that at the end of the day, the people using these vehicles for every form of activity, they want to see the improvement in their lives.
Right.
It's not just clean air,
Yeah.
there's also cost-saving benefits.
But Adedayo, we've seen situations where it's right to own, and those contracts become very stringent and oftentimes tagged as modern-day slavery, for lack of a better word. And so, that's even for combustible energy vehicles. But for EVs, it's completely different, because not only are you trying to make it attractive for them, there's also an issue of accessibility in terms of parts and charging and all of that put together. So what is a marketability like for a terrain like Nigeria? And penetration is another interesting word. I mean, when we're looking at the north or northeast or west, and also parts where it's hard to reach and they have electricity issues. I think that Nigeria itself, the terrain is completely different. So let's talk about challenges and gaps that needs to be closed for us.
Okay, so I think the most important gap that needs to be addressed first today is the involvement of the government, right? Policies around standardization, fiscal policies that just help, sort of put some framework around what it is that is going on in this space. Then once that is out of the way, we can then now begin to talk about, it's a nascent space that we need to build infrastructure for. So how then do we then begin to roll out infrastructure? That's the business it is that we do today, right? Till date, we've rolled out 10 battery and charging stations across the city of Lagos, and we're raising capital now to be able to continuously deploy those solutions, not just in urban cities but rural areas as well. So there is the challenge of that, and I think lastly, right, would be access to capital. Commercial capital is still pretty much very expensive, and this is where also we need the government to also still step in. Capital that allows us to, it's infrastructure, so it's a lot of debt, right? Patient capital that allows us to build out these stations, and we're not stifled by wanting to pay back that capital almost immediately. Conventional finances, things around grants and things like that. So the government still needs to pump that in as well, to sort of build out what I consider would be the real framework. But to also address one of the things you said earlier on around mitigate, how do we ensure that drivers are not slaved up by some of these finances? Yeah. So I mean, it's true that the default rate for financing in Nigeria is pretty high, but what we've also seen is that over the years the numbers have significantly improved. Right? We're seeing people, because we're able to come up with several mitigating strategies to ensure that people pay off this debt. Those numbers have tremendously improved in the last 3 years. Now, for the off-taker, you are talking about him not being able to pay, but the provider, the OEM, the manufacturer, or the financer is also taking a risk, by deploying those vehicles. So one of the strategies it is that we have also seen is, if they're doing it right to own, right, there's an equity investment also required from some of these drivers, so that they also have a skin in the game, right, to be able to make sure that they pay. And for the financer or the producers of these vehicles, what we've also done is, because they have to come and charge at the station, or because they have to come and do a battery swap at the charging station, we're able to ensure that they make those payments before that particular activity is done. So it's all learning in around the space to ensure that at the end of the day, we can drive the adoption and catalyze the growth of EVs.
How can you carry the informal sector along? We talked about that. I asked you earlier, forgive me, Chiwete, the mechanics, those, the drivers as well, and also commuters. How do we include them in this EV evangelism?
Also, all right. So part of our job, right, as an organization in Zoome, first off, is to provide infrastructure for electric vehicles to be able to charge and swap their batteries, is after-sales service and maintenance. So we've committed a lot of money into training drivers, engineers, technicians, and mechanics. Now, there's also an association called EMPMAN, and that's the e-mobility association in Nigeria. Just recently, I think about a month ago or a month and a half ago, they had trainings for roughly around, I think, 150 plus technicians that want to learn how to repair these vehicles. So the momentum is building, right? the right things are being done. 3 years ago when it is, 3.5 years ago when we started this journey, there were less than 100 vehicles on the road that were electric, right? Today, we have north of, 4,000 vehicles in Nigeria that are electric. And, the signs are there that the improvement will continue, especially to your point on the informal sector. Capital is being deployed to continuously train people. Resources are being deployed to ensure that drivers enjoy as much uptime and stuff like that. So I think we've caught it in Nigeria. It's only a matter of how fast we can then now begin to grow with this.
How about spare parts? Because the spare parts are something that's quite important when it comes to maintenance of vehicles.
Yes.
Is there some sort of awareness now to the spare part dealers to start to shift a bit from what they have now?
Your brothers.
So there's that awareness for
your brothers.
Yes. So let me tell you. So when we started this in 2023, we engaged a few OEMs. We brought them into the country. What we did with them specifically was continue to give continuous feedback as to how the product could improve to almost arrive at a product market fit in terms of the vehicles. Now, these OEMs have done that, and some of them are now even in country as we speak. So they have brought in the spare parts. They have brought in more than sufficient parts to be able to carry out repairs. So I don't really think that's a problem today again in terms of spare part. Moreover, I think outside the battery, the controller and the converter, most vehicles already have parts that are similar to petrol vehicles.
I see. Let's talk about public-private partnership.
Awesome.
And just the government and industry as well. For companies like yourself, and also others who are breaking in the mold and trying to find a niche for themselves. I think that the government has also done a bit. I think earlier this year with the tax reforms, when it comes to try to make it more attractive for cleaner companies and green energy companies to come in. In terms of the nation staring towards climate change, climate resilient companies. And so I want to ask if that's enough, and what can we do to strengthen PPP regarding EVs and cleaner companies?
Yeah, I'll just go back to some of the things that I said earlier. First of all, we need to see more action from the government.
It's one thing to write papers, another thing to implement them.
Exactly. We need to see a lot more action. We need to see a lot more action and intent from the government. I wouldn't want to start mentioning names of countries here, but in East Africa, what it is we have seen is the mass adoption it is that they've gained in terms of vehicles, in terms of policies, in terms of framework, were not just backed by the government, they were executed by the government. The government ensured that those things were followed through. So for any private-public partnership to work, I think, first of all, the government needs to come in and give the private sector the confidence that this is something that they're looking to play long-term. And I think, like I said, it's only a matter of time before we arrive at that junction. So the policy is important. And, again, we can't build out this space without capital, right? We need some sort of concessional finance from both the government and the private sector, pumped into the economy. It could be through, some climate funding strategy or I don't know how it is, we're going to frame that. But that finance needs to also come in to ensure that we're able to build out the infrastructure, because without the infrastructure, we can't do anything. Right, so that's where I see the private and public partnership coming in. It's on the policy side and on the finance side.
Policy and finance.
I've heard you say a lot about what the government has to do, but then again, I'm just wondering if this particular government is ready. I mean, we've seen how we've struggled with energy for quite some time. Even talking about refineries, people are talking about they should sell it at the end of the day. So I'm just wondering if truly they're ready to actually do what they need to do to ensure that this transition is seamless.
Yeah, so I think I'm not going to point out the government again. I'm going to commend them here.
So glad you threw your mama.
I'm not going to comment. I'm not going to point finger. I'm going to commend. So we have honestly started seeing some traction from the government, especially around some incentives. So their duty waivers to to the EVs already, and it's not just by mouth. You know,
Okay.
I have seen people bring in EVs and they have gotten some heavy level of subsidy and waivers, you know, there. And the NADDC, you know, which is the council responsible for the policy, have made tremendous strides, you know, in putting that policy together. I think at the earliest we're expecting, you know, we're expecting that policy out, you know, next year, and that's what, you know, that's what is being whispered around, you know, the agency. And when that comes in, you know, we're then able to say we can then now build on that. So the government is important. I think to the pace that this needs to grow, it could be better, but it's not the worst, and it's only a matter of time before we see the full effect of some of the policies it is they're going to be bringing in. And you know, you have to always remember as well, the Western world is not producing petrol cars anymore. A lot of them have cut-off dates. So
what about drill, baby, drill? There's been the... Why are you people laughing? No, no, but seriously though.
Yeah.
Trump's inaugural speech, right? The commands were simple: drill, baby, drill, right? And we've seen, I mean, with the bombings of the Venezuelan sheeps, as much as they're saying is completely different, we know that at the heart of everything is oil, right? And so, as we're saying that we're moving towards cleaner energy, one of the world's largest powers and largest economies are still trying to go back, you know, to that time.
Yes.
So it's sort of I don't know the term, you know, the dichotomy of it all. It's
yeah, I think eventually it's a super long-term agenda. I don't think
super long-term.
Yes, because eventually it's going to come and stay. It's the future of even what the fuel is, right? Fuel has. Most fuel companies are going to move into energy. I mean, it's pretty straightforward, but you know, it's going to take some time, right? It's the world we're talking about here. Yeah, but you know, it's important that those conversations already start now.
Yeah, am I being too ambitious if I say should be looking at, you know, Nigerians also making their own electric cars?
No. Yeah, manufacturing. Thank you.
No, that makes it even easier in terms of
localization of even the ecosystem in itself, right? It's important that at least 60 to 70% of the part of those vehicles, we're able to locally manufacture them here. Let me tell you what that does for us. First, it brings the cost of these vehicles down by a tremendous percentage. Secondly, it creates jobs, it creates opportunities, you know, improves livelihood for the locals here. So you're not being too ambitious by saying that, you know, we need to look at localizing, not just even manufacturing, but even assembling, right? You're not being too ambitious. And I think, again, there are already conversations ongoing as to how some of those things begin to come into the country. I say these things because, you know, I've been around the block in the EV space for a while, so I know what is actually going on.
Right.
Yeah.
Chiwete drives an SUV. To fuel his car is 120,000 naira. Oh, sorry.
Big boy.
Big boy.
That's fake news, please. Fake news.
And so to get an EV, you know, if he's trying to be, you know, very earth conscious and, you know, be more attractive to the ladies. As if his SUV is not doing enough. Yeah. He most likely would have to, you know, want to change to the clean, green car, right? So, and if, so that would be expensive, right? And that would be expensive. So let's look at, you know, the price in terms of in the market and what the options are. I mean, for myself, that I'm using Legacy's Benz. You know, if I want to
another fake news again. Another fake news, please.
I want to, you know, I mean, so I don't know, mopeds. So what are we looking at in terms of? As we're talking about it. Because we have to look at economic indices, cost of living crisis. This one is a big man. Me, I'm a small baby.
So I'll tell you something again. The best news I have for both of you today is you spent how much? $120.
I know, that's right.
I don't know. I don't know from now.
Yeah, you're probably spending, you know, around 50,000 naira for the same distance it is you travel with that 120,000 naira fuel that you're buying. Okay. Now, this is not an assumption. This is a fact backed by multiple test practices, right? That's that. Now, to you that wants to purchase, because like I said, in Nigeria, we're not really used to buying new cars, new things. So there's that headache of a lot of the EVs that are being produced today are actually new. So the best way to get past that hurdle is through some form of financing. And I can guarantee you today, there are multiple financing partners out there.
The ones that will charge you even your children's kidney, your unborn child kidney.
So what it is that, that affords people is, of course, the financing companies have to make a bit of margin.
Yeah.
Of course, it will be slightly priced higher than, if you're going to outrightly take out of pocket to purchase those vehicles. But what it then allows you to do is to integrate that financing into your monthly, your monthly expense, right? And what you are actually then taking advantage of is the amount of money you would have actually been using to fuel that car and maintain it.
Right.
Yeah. So to you that wants to purchase one, he says you're a big woman. You can actually take out a pocket. You can just
relax, calm down, calm down. What about lower middle class? What about lower class in terms of, motorcycles?
Okay, so for the motorcycles, today we have companies that are pricing the electric motorcycles at the same price of the fuel motorcycles.
Oh,
yes.
Okay, well, yes. I found my brand. I found my spec now.
Some tricycles also.
Yes. So why that has been possible anyway is because to an extent, there are arrangements. Okay, so I'll use our own example as a proper case study here. So we have arrangements with OEMs that allows us to take some sort of ownership of that battery and split the cost over a period of time based on our revenue between ourselves and the manufacturers of those vehicles. So the off-taker actually, or the person that's trying to purchase that vehicle, is only buying the chassis. You're only buying the chassis in itself. And I would also, enlighten people a little bit. The most expensive part of an electric vehicle is the battery. It's the single most expensive part. So if you take off that battery cost from people, it allows them, almost price the vehicle with the petrol counterpart.
Where are we in terms of the number of charging stations that we have in Nigeria? Because I'm sorry,
because you want to buy for me, you need to know where I need to charge my motorcycle. Thank you.
No disrespect, but then it's a case of those who move interstate, right? So Lagos, yes, we can have a few numbers.
See, a big man.
When you go to places like Osun or somewhere else, I don't know. Let me not call any state. I'm tracking it, but we know that there's some level of a disparity when it comes to level of development.
And you will not be able to drive long distance.
So exactly. So people who
or even within Lagos, because so for some persons that live on Lekki, example AEG, and EG as well. Whenever they want to move from Lekki all the way down to Oroshoki, or all of us that are in the background here, there's long distance with them.
Okay, so two things. First of all, in terms of charging stations that you have in Lagos.
Okay.
So we currently have 10. We have 3 on the island, 7 on the mainland.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, that distributed. Yes, no, on the grand scheme of things.
Small.
Because mainland is bigger than island now.
No. On the grand scheme of things, it's small. But our plan in the next 5 years is to deploy roughly around 500 charging stations across the country. As I speak to you,
that's IBAB money.
That's why we're asking the government, and that's why we're pleading on the public-private partnership to come on board.
Adedayo, I must say thank you for taking our time to join us.
Awesome.
Thank you. This has been so much fun. Adedayo Odunlami, he's the CEO and co-founder of Zoome, talking to us about electric vehicles and the future of electric. One time in our lives, there were ads saying that cars could run on water. This guy wasn't born then. It's goodbye from us. Make sure to tune in on Monday, bright and early, to join Olive, Benga, and Joe on Breakfast Central. This is the Breakfast Xtra. I'm Judith.
And my name is Chiwete.
And of course, it's Adedayo. Good morning.